How much land does it take for self-sufficiency? What size of a garden is optimal? Can my garden be too big, too small? Can I actually have too much land and be land poor because of it? What if I am land poor? How do I manage all my excess land? These are really important questions and often way misunderstood. In fact, I think this is the single most misunderstood and most misrepresented topic in all of food and farming and gardening social media. And it's important because when you understanding this topic completely changed the way I garden, the way I think about farming, the way I think about our food systems. Once you see this, you cannot unsee it. You can't go back, and it will change the way you look at farms on social media. It will change the way you think about the farming system, about food, and about your own garden. So I think this is a really important topic, and we're going to discuss it in a lot of different aspects. Like, we're going to discuss how much land do you need if you want to have farm animals? How much if you want to have, your version of the American diet, standard American diet, only a healthy version that you grew yourself? How much if you want to have a vegan diet? All of those things, we're going to unpack that. We're going to look into it. We're going to look at different perspectives, and we're going to narrow it down. I'm going to give you a lot of different answers so that you can figure out how much you need and how you want to use the land that you have. Now, like I said, this will change the way you garden, because understanding this changed the way I garden. This is so important that I would say this is the key to permaculture. So this might be the most controversial video I've ever done. It's probably one of the most important videos of mine that you'll ever watch if you want to have a more efficient, easier, productive garden that is high value for you. This is so important that we could define permaculture about this, and a lot of people don't understand this, so they don't understand what permaculture even is. So we're going to give it away all away today. We're going to give away permaculture's secret sauce. And by the way, this is something, I'm Mike Hogue, and this is something I've cared about for decades because I grew up on a family farm. We had acreage in commodity crops, we had acreage in tree crops, we had an acreage in forest and woodland and for a woodlot. And we had a 5-acre market garden too, and then sometimes we would have a smaller garden and some orchard trees as well. And so I've worked on farms of all different scales. I've been observing farmers and hanging out with them since I was a kid. I've worked in practically every part of the industry. And then for the last few decades, I've been studying permaculture. I heard the word the first time in 2001. And I've been very fascinated about it ever since, studying permaculture farms, going around looking at what people were doing. And by the way, if that sounds like a person you want to follow and learn from on social media, give me a follow, give me a like. We all appreciate that on here. It's how you can basically kind of compensate us a little bit for the time that we put into these videos to help you all understand things, have better gardens. So I'd appreciate that like and a follow. And what I'll give you back is the best high quality content that comes from my own decades of experience doing this stuff, myself observing others doing it, studying it, and reading deeply into the research about these things. I try to give you only ideas that are backed up in the research. So let's come back to this idea. How much land does it really take to be self-sufficient? Well, it's a pretty subjective question in a lot of ways. There are a lot of ways to look at it. So why don't we start with the simplest answer there is, and we're going to be discussing some of this data as we go forward. What is the minimum amount of land that you can feed a single person off of? This is very surprising to people. Most people get this entirely wrong. A lot of people will jump to an acre or more automatically. An acre per person, I hear that number all the time. Do you know how much it is? Have you heard this? There is an organization I'll be talking about, and an author in particular, John Jevons, wrote a great book called How to Grow More Vegetables Than You Ever Thought on Less Land Than You Could Ever Imagine. Something like that. It's a really long book title. Anyway, it's a great book, and it's filled with math. And then there was also an organization associated with that book called Bountiful Gardens, and Grow Biointensive was the name of the method. So you can Google those things. They've got a space on the website for peer-reviewed research that covers all the stuff that I'm going to be talking about. So, and you might be shocked that they also worked with the creation of a pamphlet called One Circle, and the point of it was to try to identify what the minimum size garden you could have to sustainably feed one person, a nutritionally and calorically complete diet for a year. And depending on the climate, and depending on whether you're male or female, how big you are, the basic idea is that it's going to be 1,200 square feet or less. That's shockingly small, right? The garden I'm sitting in here right now, my Zone 1 urban vegetable garden here, is bigger than that. So with that, we can have an idea that a few thousand square feet could conceivably feed a family a complete diet for the year. But it's going to be a boring diet, and you can't afford to have any crop losses with that. It's got to be perfect. You've got to have high yields, and you can't lose anything. And it's going to be boring. You have to eat the right things on the right days all year round, and that's all you get to eat, right? But you get a complete healthy diet that way. So, but using that basic information and the information on what makes a complete diet for all the different micro and macronutrients and all of that, they were able to calculate and blow that out to another number. And let's say for a balanced, complete, and interesting diet with some extras to sell, to trade, to give away for fun, or in case you have some catastrophic crop losses, we can put that as a full-time farm doing this kind of intensive, super intensive, loaded in their vegetable gardening, a vegetarian diet on maybe 10,000 square feet to a quarter of an acre to a third of an acre. By the way, if you look it up, you'll also find I've got videos about this and videos that talk about the different papers involved here. If you look into this and you read the literature, you would know that that's also right in line with what the historic global average was for most societies worldwide over history. In fact, that was the approximate size of the main Greek parcel, the ancient Greek parcel of land. So they allotted land into homestead sizes for people to be able to grow a complete family diet on that amount of land. And there was a third of an acre. And they figured they could grow a complete diet, have some small livestock, get some protein in the diet, maybe eggs, something like that, and also contribute to the society, because they weren't just spending their whole lifetime working on that farm. So a third of an acre was what they came up with. And if you look at research into modern Southeast Asia and South America and India, we'll find that homestead sizes there for self-sufficiency tend to range between about a quarter of an acre up to about a maximum of 5 acres. Historically, except when you get into the United States, it was really unusual to see farm sizes bigger than 5 acres. And there's a really important reason why. Well, for one, we know why farms are huge in Australia and in the United States. It's because, people just came from Europe and took the land, so there was tons of land, free land, we'd said. There's free land. So we just gave it away to people, literally. In a lot of cases, we gave it to the colonels or the generals or whoever who came through and kicked all of the native population off the land. Once the native population was gone, we often gave it to the military people who kicked them off as their reward, as their payment. And then the land was owned. So then the native people couldn't ask for it back because it was owned by somebody. So making sure the land was owned was part of the legal system for how they did that. So in the United States, we ended up with these huge farms that then got parceled out by those owners over the generations, and it made their families wealthy for generations, future generations to come. And that was all part of the deal to them. If they, served in that way by stealing the land, they were going to be really well compensated, and their families would be compensated for many generations to come too. So we ended up with these big old farms because of that. But elsewhere, the farm size had to make sense. And what we see in the studies is that when you go over, what we see in the studies is the secret sauce, part of the secret sauce. Now, hopefully, as I do this video, you're going to see the secret sauce, and once you see it, you can never unsee it. It will change the way you think about farming and your own garden. So, what everybody in the world, prior to slavery and fossil fuels, what everybody in the world had figured out by trial and error was what economists labeled the law of diminishing returns. Economists discovered this by studying agriculture too. Economists were trying to answer exactly this question. And this goes back, by the way, to Virgil. This goes back to the very beginnings of agricultural science, where Virgil said, admire a large farm, but farm a small one. And why did he say that? Because in those studies we see that as farms that are a quarter of an acre are usually pretty poor. And as the farm gets bigger, the families get wealthier. Now we're talking about families that usually had food forests, and they have lots of kids to work the farm and work the land. So they have labor, they've got good labor, and the labor grew up on the farm, so it's educated labor, they know what they're doing, and they're very loyal to their parents, so they're going to do it right. So we're talking about a great labor source. And so from a quarter of an acre up to about an acre, incomes and wealth ascends. Then it starts evening out, and then we get, that's the law of diminishing returns, and then we get reversed returns. Once we go over 2 acres in a lot of cases, maybe 3 in some special cases where they're doing large food forests. By the way, are you understanding what the special sauce is? Yeah, I'm going to tell you at the end of this video. I'll tell you what the special sauce of permaculture is. So then the income starts to go down once you get up to 5 acres. Beyond 5 acres, it just doesn't make any sense, most places in the world, to own any more land than that if you are trying to farm it profitably and work it in a profitable way. So, by the way, why do we have huge farms in the United States then? A lot of people think that it's because of the automation, mechanization, but it's actually not. It's actually not. Because what we see in a lot of the research, again, is that even huge farms aren't really profitable in the United States. They are a way of getting tax dollars. They're a way of getting tax subsidies. It's a tax scheme. And why do we do that? Again, it started out with this idea of of consolidating properties, kicking people off the land. First Native Americans, later poor whites and African Americans, kicking them off the land to make free, cheap labor for corporations and industrialists. So that was really the goal of it, not because it was more, it's not that the free market determined it, it was that the federal government had this idea that we wanted to kick people off the land to free up cheap labor for industrialists. So that's what we did. And so we've got all these tax subsidies that you can get for simply holding on to land. You don't actually have to farm the land to get the tax subsidies. In fact, in a lot of cases, that cuts into your tax subsidies. It makes the tax subsidies less valuable. So these days we still have these huge farms, which we're going to talk about more in a little bit. So, okay, so where are we at? We're at the idea of the minimum size that it takes for a good farm. And keep in mind this idea that we've already seen that in traditional societies, we start to get a cutoff point at about 5 acres, because over that we get diminishing returns, and the larger land simply does not pay for itself. It doesn't provide any value. And so usually people in a lot of those societies, if you got like 5 acres, that's a sign that you're wealthy, because traditionally, like Virgil again would call that land poor. Bill Molson called that land poor. It means you have so much land that you're actually getting diminishing returns, and you're more poor than if you had less land. So again, yeah, Virgil talked about that. A lot of people have talked about that. It's a well understood concept. So, by the way, it does change a little bit once we get into some modern tools. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about a lot of different aspects of this. So that sweet spot seems to be, depending on the place, depending on whether or not your culture has forest gardening, which allows you to have a larger farm area profitably, or whether you don't have that kind of system. And if you don't have that kind of system, you're usually going to have much smaller kind of parcels of land, maybe 1/3 of an acre, like in Greece. So there we're starting to get that sweet spot between maybe 1/4 of an acre, 1/3 of an acre for self-sufficiency, up to an acre, a couple acres. Beyond that, we start to get into some interesting problems, and which is that it gets to be really difficult to know how to manage the landscape in a way that's constructive. A good time for me to go and sit by my edible meadow guild. A great way, we've got some of my intensive garden in the background there. And I'm going to go sit with my edible meadow behind me. It's a great way to manage a landscape that's productive, like a food forest, and very low maintenance. Okay. So again, are you getting the special sauce? Are you starting to see what the special sauce of permaculture is? So, let's look at another way of measuring land. There's a study out there that I show in a lot of my, with a graphic. I'm not going to put up on here. I'm just out here in my garden talking, but I show this graphic in a lot of my videos. You can Google it and search for land area requirements for 7 different diet scenarios. Try that. That might get it. And you'll see a graphic, and that graphic shows how many hectares it takes to feed a person using different types of land. And in that, we see that using modern conventional gardening techniques, it takes farming techniques in the world today, modern best American farming techniques, it takes about 1/4 of an acre to feed one person. But we know, and this is an important thing, we know for a fact that's super land inefficient. So here's another secret thing. Modern American farming is well understood, well known by scientists to be land inefficient comparative to what you could get at best in your garden if you're a really expert gardener. Now, there are a lot of bad gardeners too. So some people will point that out and say, well, all the gardeners are bad gardeners, so they can't compete with industrial ag. The point of the industrial ag, like when you're dry, you know this in your heart and soul. You've driven around and you see a farm field, and think about all the farm fields you see where the yields are very inconsistent. You might have really high yields through a lot of it, but then you might have a whole like quarter of an acre where you're getting really terrible yields. You might have whole fields where there's complete crop losses. But added up over a large area, added up over everything, you get consistent large yields for a farm. So there are benefits to it. It's really impressive, actually. So what we've done since the Green Revolution is pretty impressive. But the question in this video is, how much land do you want for your garden? Or is it a different thing? So, but this is a good point. Okay, first let's finish our thought. So, for a vegan diet, it is about a quarter of an acre for one person. For diets with small amounts of eggs and dairy and meat, it's actually, get this, a lot of you people are going to love this and some of you are going to hate this, it's actually more efficient than the vegan diet. Not significantly, it's still about a quarter of an acre, but is actually more efficient than the vegan diet to have diets with some amount of eggs, meat, and dairy. It helps the system's efficiency overall, is why we get that. And then there are small increases in the land area again, maybe a third of an acre, using modern techniques to a half an acre for diets with some more meat, basically. So that would be one way of looking at it. But here, keep this in mind. And then we move up to the standard American diet. I think it's about a hectare and a half. It's a few acres, like in order to grow a complete diet for one person in the industrial food system using the standard American diet. It's very wasteful. It's very land inefficient. So some people will look at that and then they'll say, oh, well, then if I want to have a few children and I don't want to have to worry about crop loss, I need 10 acres. Okay, so that's where you start to get some of those numbers like 10 acres that you'll hear from people. But the question is, does that make any sense at all for you to do or for me to do? And the answer to that is no. It makes no sense at all. Once you understand the special sauce, once you get the special sauce I'm about to tell you about, and you understand it, and you see it, you can't go back. You will understand the food system. You'll understand all the agricultural scams. And so, by the way, I was sitting here looking at these gummy berries, and I had to come over here and grab some while I'm doing this very silly video. Okay. This silly but very important video. The thing to understand about those numbers is that an intensive vegetable garden, like this one behind me, at your home, can absolutely trounce the productivity of those industrial ag numbers. So looking at that research from Grow Biointensive, and look that I often cite in my videos, when we switch to those kinds of gardens, those keyhole gardens, etc., we can often get yields. Okay, let's do this. I've recently done some videos that showed the research. So this is a way to key into research, very important to me. One video had research on intensive plantings. And in a lot of cases, you can fit easily 5 times as many crops on scale into the same area as you could with a standard conventional row crop garden. So right there, we're getting 5 times the productivity. So in other words, if it's going to take, that quarter of an acre to grow a vegan diet, a standard vegan diet for one person, we can shrink that way down. If we are, and then on top of that, we can get higher yields because the system is simply more efficient. The plants are healthier in these sorts of systems, and we tend to get a yield bonus from that up to 30%. Then, if you look at the research on intercropping, we're talking about the true ingredients permaculture. Plant densities that are scientifically based, that are optimal, lots of dense plantings, and polycultures. Those two things together, we can often get yields that are 300% in a lot of the scientific literature, higher than in monocultures. With intercropping, in a lot of places, especially once we start to have 2, 3, 4 crops, 3 or 4 crops, more crops, the more crops, the better for consistently high yields. It's really common to get land area equivalents, which is how scientists measure this, that are close to 2 or more. And what that means, and if you've got multiple crops, we can often get 300% greater, higher yields in the same area as if we grow one crop alone. So my point here is we start to see those grow biointensive numbers and how you can grow a complete family diet that's a vegan diet very easily on 10,000 square feet and have a lot of variety, have some to give away, have some for income, to sell, all of that. So none of that is really a mystery, right? That's the secret sauce there. But here is the big question. And people always ask me, well, if you do this permaculture stuff, you have to know all these special plant spacings. You need to, set up these perennials. You got to do all this stuff. Isn't it easier then to just till an acre and do it in a row garden? Like somebody just asked me, if you're doing an acre, doing intensive polyculture planting, biointensive polycultures, compared to an acre doing a row crop garden and tilling it, wouldn't the row crop garden be easier? Are you seeing the special sauce yet? Are you getting the special sauce here? Is this clicking? You see how that's entirely the wrong question now. Because what we just said is we can get yields that, like Grow Biointensive has documented in peer-reviewed research, as high as 40 times higher than conventional in a lot of cases. That's very realistic to think that you were going to grow, get 10 times or more of the yields. So, of course, I cannot do a full acre garden doing my intensive plantings like my front garden and my back herb garden that you often see in my videos. I can't manage that on an acre. It'd take way too much time. It's impossible. I'd need 4 or 5 of me, and I'd need them to be as smart and as well trained as me and understand plants as well as me, and to work together coordinated with me. It's really hard to do. But why would I need to do that? Because I can grow 1/10 of an acre intensive garden and get higher yields than the 1 acre garden. I'm using land far more efficiently, and it's going to require far, far, far less work. There's the special sauce that a lot of scientists talk about and that we see. Scientists call this the law of diminishing returns again, and we see the same thing happen with our yields over space in agriculture. So that for one person getting yields out of a land area, the yields go down as the land area increases, because the amount of time that it takes to manage garden is not linear. It's not linear. It drops off very fast, actually. So I can feed a family on a few hours of work per week with 10,000 square feet of intensive garden and a little bit of extra land and food forest. But I could not feed, let's say, honestly, 2 to 5 hours a week. That's a really realistic benchmark for people. For the growing, not the processing and making meals, but the growing. That's a really realistic benchmark. But that does not mean that I can grow the food for 20 families on 40 hours a week, or 40 families on 40, or about 20 hours or 20 families on 40 hours a week. It does not work that way. Because I cannot manage a full acre as productively as I can manage a small garden. Think about it this way. If you've got an acre of row crop, you have to weed an entire acre. And there's almost nothing you can do to make it so that there won't be weeds. But if I have a small garden, I can sheet mulch with cardboard, I can use mulch makers, I can use living ground covers like in my gardens, like you see in all my videos, and I can end up with almost no weeds, period, to start with, and do very little weeding work at all. And even if I did have to do weeding work, it would be on a much smaller area. There would be far less to do. So if I can grow more yields on 1/10 of an acre doing permaculture than I can on a full acre conventional, it's going to require far, 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 far less work. That's the special sauce. Wait. That's not 100% of the special sauce yet. There's more to it, right? There's more to it. We've already talked about that. So we're starting to see this law of diminishing returns. And we see this in the profitability research within the United States too. So if we look at, there's a lot of farm research, and if you look at the farm profitability research, something that's really consistent from my reading of it is the same diminishing returns. So there are a lot of micro farms farming 10,000 square feet, doing Jevons style stuff, doing super high value crops that require a lot of care and doing high productivity on them. And they can make tens of thousands of dollars a year off 10,000 square feet. Again, doesn't that mean I could make 4 times that off an acre? And unfortunately, it just doesn't work that way. I can never get those same yields because I have to, at a certain point, I have to switch to conventional techniques. Like I was telling you, there's no way I could manage an acre garden the way I do things. So in order for me to manage a garden at an acre, I usually have to switch over to either having a large workforce, then I'm not a gardener anymore. I'm a manager, managing a bunch of people who usually don't like me because I have to underpay them, or they're interns and they're not paid at all, or they're woofers. And so they end up being grumpy with me because they would like money for labor because that sounds like a good deal. So really quickly, a lot of the income starts going to other people, plus the income drops off. So 1 acre conventional just never makes any money in the research. You start to get a reset. You can, this small micro garden doing microgreens even inside can make a lot of money per square foot. A garden outside that's an intensive garden, bino-intensive garden that with polycultures and all that can make a ton of money per square foot. And then we get this drop off. You have to switch to managing a labor force or using fossil fuels and big equipment. As soon as you do that, you're getting very low yields. You've reversed your yields. Now, if you can get, 40 times the yields of conventional on 10,000 square feet, that means we have to move up to multiple acres, maybe 3-4 acres in order to get the same productivity out of the small garden. Now you're spending a ton of time managing a big garden, a big labor force. You're gardening 4 acres. Wow, you got a big farm. That's something to show off, just like in Virgil's day. Admire a big farm, but farm a small one. The big farm is about conspicuous consumption and showing off, not anything practical. You're getting a bigger yield still out of the smaller garden. It's better for the planet. It's better for people. It's better for your family. You're doing it on a lot less labor. It's just overall usually better. So for me, what I have learned from like decades of being around this, given the choice, I will farm a maximum, if I've got help, intensively, 1/4 of an acre, 10,000 square feet, maybe up to not even a third of an acre. Quarter of an acre, absolutely max, probably 10,000 square feet. 6,000 square feet is a lot. That's a lot. You can produce a lot of food for a family and a lot to sell on 6,000 square feet. That's really ideal. 4,000 to 6,000 square feet, super optimal in my opinion. That's what Lily House was. You go up from there and you're making yourself land poor in most cases. So then we're starting to see another economics concept that's very well understood, and again goes back in the history of farming and understanding all this. This is the idea of no man's land. So as businesses scale, you got to understand there are two types of businesses. There are businesses that make a decent profit per product, right? Per unit. When I'm growing things on a small scale, I'm trying to give you premium products at a good price point, right? At a good price point for me. Super premium products. As we go up to conventional, then I would have to sell you products that are drenched in poisons and pesticides or alternatives to that like plastics. It's impossible to get around it. It's going to be a less healthy product. It's not going to have the same nutrient density. It's not going to taste as good. You're a fool. We're foolish if we're buying those products at the same price point as super high quality products grown on a small scale. And the taste, there's no comparison. So that means that those products usually sell at a lower price point, and you're trying to get a tiny profit off each product. You know, a penny of profit per every 10 ears of corn or something like that. We're going for really, really tiny amounts of profit over a large area. You add it up over thousands of acres, 2,000 acres, 3,000 acres, you made hundreds of thousands of dollars. But that's what you need. You need huge acreage in order to compete. So what we see in the statistics in the United States is that there's a huge drop-off. We've got farms that in some cases, really stop truly being very profitable. You could get orchards that are profitable at like 30 acres. So there's something. If you're going to have a lot of land and you want it to be profitable, switch to an orchard, switch to a long-term orchard. Agroforestry systems with like tree crops where you're going to be selling the trees for lumber at the end of them can be very profitable on that middle scale there. After 30 acres, it's all a wash again. It's all tax scams. It's not actually profitable. People are making money off tax evasion, basically, instead of actually making money profiting from their farming. But when it comes to vegetables and grains farming, there's a huge drop-off again once we get past that like 5 acres max. It's really hard to make that profitable as it is. But so we have a few different layers of profitability. You've got the very small farms being very profitable per area. Then we've got slightly bigger farms, usually with a mix of that kind of stuff and more extensive systems, special sauce. You know what I'm saying? And those can be profitable. And once you get much over that, it's really tough to make those farms very profitable, unless you're doing some specialty crops, 30 acres of strawberries, asparagus, something like that. People do make it work, but it's really hard. Then there's a huge drop-off. And nobody is profitable until they get farms. Again, nobody is truly, honestly profitable if you look at this, if you look at the fine print, you look at their details, you look at what they're really doing. If they're in between that and thousands of acres, they're not actually profitable. When they report to the government, we look at their actual details. Their life circumstances are usually not great. They're doing a lot of work for very low pay, usually under minimum wage. They're self-exploiting. Why? Just so they can brag that they have a big farm. It's just like, again, the places in Southeast Asia where they've got a bigger farm And it's just conspicuous consumption. They're just showing off that they can afford to be land poor because they're wealthy. So that's the kind of situation we end up with here then. So that's the no man's land. Anything between, maybe 30 acres if it's managed really, really well doing permaculture stuff, and 1,000 acres, maybe around there, is very unlikely to be profitable. It's going to be a lot of work, a lot of hardship for very little reward. That's just the facts of how the numbers work out. That's economics no man's land. There are books about that. It's an economics concept that is well understood for agriculture. It has been for a very long time. Nobody talks about it because they want to show off their supposedly big farm. They usually rarely farm at all. Look at my recent videos where I show some pictures of large farms, people bragging on the internet that they've got these large farms in a lot of cases, and it's almost all lawn they're mowing. It's all lawn because they can't actually manage it as farm. It's all lawn that they're mowing, riding around on the lawnmower claiming they're farming. And then they brag that people with smaller farms who actually have super high productivity, growing more produce, more vegetables, and being more profitable, they're not real farmers because they're not farming all this big land. And, like I said, it's going to be a controversial video. You don't want that to be you. That's the point of this video. You don't want that. You don't need that. You're smart. You know that the real value of your farming comes from feeding people and feeding the soil, and growing a healthy ecosystem, not showing off on the internet, bragging about how many acres you mow. Okay, so then, brings us to the last question of this video. What do you do if you're land poor? And how do you optimize the land that you grow? Do you know what the special sauce is yet? What permaculture actually is? Do you know what permaculture actually is and why permaculture is so powerful? Why permaculture actually works? It's the same thing we were talking about in those small traditional farms, indigenous farms, and how they manage land. The secret sauce of permaculture isn't a technique for intensive gardening, and it's not the food forest technique for extensive gardening. Permaculture is neither of those things. Get it yet? Permaculture is the balance between the two. It's an understanding that if I have 5 acres and just simple math and experience and knowledge tells me that I will have diminishing returns after around 10,000 square feet, unless I've got some kind of automation going on, some kind of mechanization going on, then I can have profitably maybe 10,000, 16,000, a third of an acre of productive intensive garden. If I try to go over that, I'm going to get diminishing yields. I'll be farming more land, spending more time, more resources to get less yield out of it, less utility, and less profitability out of it. Why would I do that? Why would I do that? Just to brag on the internet that I got a bigger garden that I actually value? So we're seeing the optimal size there for someone who wants to do this profitably and practically. But I've got 5 acres, I just said. So what do I do with the rest of it? That's where the idea of food forest and edible meadows and things come in. You can get additional yields, additional productivity. These gummy berries, I'm never going to have to do any work for these. They're free. They're free food. All I do is harvest them. At this point, my strawberry forest systems, all I do is harvest that. There's like 3 weeds in that whole area. It's all just strawberries and other crop plants that I also harvest. So if I've got 5 acres, I'm going to be looking to let as much of it go wild as I possibly can, have a small area of intensive food forest, let nature manage the rest of it for me in ways where I could potentially get some sorts of yields. Have people come in and share the land with them, let them come and do you pick on that, give me a little bit of money for it. It constructively manages the larger acreage Maybe use some as a woodlot, a coppice woodlot. Let people come and get fuel wood. If you want to productively manage those larger landscapes, then that's how you can do it. With tools like pick orchards and food forests and all that sort of stuff. Now, whether or not there's a huge benefit to that becomes controversial again. That all depends on you. Did you buy a 100-acre farm and so you have a huge mortgage and you feel trapped into farming it? If you got that, there are things I can help you with to make the land less burdensome. Is it ever going to be profitable? Probably not. The farm I grew up on was never profitable. Okay, one year, we made a net $700. Woo! $700. That's what we made 1 year. For the amount of work that went into it, it's preposterous. But that's where we were at. And that is part of the understanding of why I do permaculture, why I talk about all this stuff. So let's say I have a 30-acre farm. It's the same thing. I would be looking at developing maybe a third of an acre super intensively, a small, and this is the thing. If I'm going to manage a big food forest, I have to shrink my intensive garden. But no worries. I'll still probably get higher yields if I'm food foresting, right? So I might only have a 2,000 or 3,000 square foot intensive garden and lots of extensive food forest area. And I can increase my yields that way, but only to a certain point, because my life energy and my time is finite. I can only walk around harvesting things for so much, right? I can only feasibly harvest so much food in a season to sell and to eat. So at some point, there is a dead stop to my returns from my land. And the only way I can really overcome that is to hire people at a rate at which I exploit them for their labor. Otherwise, it's just never going to be profitable to bring people in to do that. So the only on paper, mathematically reasonable thing to do is to do U-pick type operations over a certain scale. How much area can you manage even U-pick in a way that's truly feasible? Maybe if you're doing, people have been experimenting around with these sorts of things. Do we do ponds, an aquaculture system, and invite people in to fish, to come in to hunt, to come in and forage, specialty crops, maybe have their own micro business where they pay us to come and harvest nuts and do something with them. People are experimenting around with these things, but there's no really guaranteed way to turn that into profitability. So, to recap, if your goal is to have a complete vegetarian diet, you can do that very feasibly on a few hours a week, work per week, on a few thousand square feet per person, very realistically. If you want to add some livestock to that, you're going to probably kick up to 12 hours of work per week at minimum. It's going to take more. If you have a few chickens or something like that, you can probably do it on a third of an acre. Once we start adding other livestock, it gets to be really difficult again. And you can do it, but starts to become a real full-time job. And most of the time, I see people's overall profits and yields go down once they start doing it. Historically, farms didn't really do that. Like, there are people these days who want to have a complete menagerie, have all of the livestock. They want to have all their own chickens because they eat chicken and eggs. They want to have cows for dairy because they drink dairy. They want to have goats. They want to have this. They want to have sheep. They want to have all of that stuff. And they end up spending all of their lifetime spending lots of amount of time for very, very tiny yields. Usually people stop gardening altogether, and the single highest value thing that you can do for profit is gardening. Gardening, you can very conceivably grow $500 of produce per hour in a really good garden. You can make $500 per hour gardening. As soon as you switch to any kind of livestock, you're talking, you're talking about minimum wage rates if you do it really well. Usually, in most cases, honestly, in the United States, if you are exploiting a lot of laborers in various ways over a lot of land and exploiting land and doing it in ways that are totally degenerative and destructive to ecosystems and cruel to animals, then you can do it in a way that's quite profitable. But if you actually care about people and the earth, it gets to be really hard to do that. It's much better to grow a nice vegetable garden, have a lot of vegetables, have some to sell, and then use your profit to buy some of that meat from somebody else who's specializing in doing it in a regenerative way. So usually it's good, if you're going to do an operation like that, to only, specialize, do one thing really ethically, really well, and as profitably as you can. If I were to do calculations on that, once I'm talking about things like pasture, then I would be using my pretty standard calculations for pasture. We can again look at profitability statistics published by the United States government. I talk to a lot of farmers. I read a lot of what a lot of farmers say. It's really, really difficult to honestly. I know there are a lot of, again, I think that you need to look at these, and I'm not going to say that they're scams, but people make a lot of really sensationalistic claims about the profitability of permaculture-esque hog farming operations and other livestock operations. And I'm very skeptical of some of the numbers that they publish. There's a lot of hidden figures there, and the numbers go against what we see from honest research and numbers published by the United States government. So, but can it work? If you do it really well, you do your business model well, you be very realistic about it. For small ethical operations, again, in my biome, I think you could potentially do a few acres, 5 acres, 10 acres, 30 acres in livestock operations in a way that weren't too much of a burden. Making those profitable is really, really difficult in my experience. If you're doing it, I'd love to hear your experience and hear about it. It's rare for me to see people who are doing it unless they inherited a bunch of land and have spouses or something who are working in other jobs and largely supporting the family by doing that. So what's the optimal, right, perfect size of land? Well, it depends, doesn't it? It depends on you, what you want, where you're living, what you want to do, but don't do too much land. Oftentimes, when it comes to land, less is more. And yeah, I don't know. I've been talking about this a lot. Do you have any other questions about this? Maybe I'll make one more video on this topic at some time. People ask me a lot of questions about this. I feel like we've pretty well covered it. We've covered all the ins and outs and what have yous. If you're interested in this sort of thing, again, give me a follow. I'll actually comb my hair next time. Give me a follow. Thanks for watching. And I promised you, cat. There he is, the Pedro in his natural element. Pedro. And that's about it. Bye.